If you're only gonna watch one set in your life, make sure that it's this one. Hello everyone to arguably my most hyped set in recent Vanguard history, Premium Collection 2019. So I've already been quite vocal about it on Twitter and other social media platforms that I'm really into Premium right now. Like, when I'm playing for videos, it often is with Standard, but when I'm playing in my free time, most of it is actually Premium because I feel the state of Premium right now is really fun. Both before Premium Collection, but especially after Premium Collection, I feel that it just became a lot more fun. Every clan got really cool strides, some better than others obviously, but most of the clans that I care about at least had some cool new fun tools, as well as even the meta clans honestly that I've never played before. I'm enjoying playing them now post this Premium Collection boost. We're gonna have an interesting structure here. First we're gonna go over the box toppers, which are reprints of Kree Elementals. Then I'm gonna quickly go over the crit. I'm not gonna show all of them for every clan obviously because they're all the same effect. Then we're gonna go over the progenitors, and then finally we're gonna go over the strides. And what's special here, and the reason why I ask you to watch this actually, is because for each of these strides, if it's a clan that I'm not familiar with, I have asked several, prominent people in the community or my trusted friends that are really good at particular clans to give me some insights to talk about for these strides and their applicability. So if you're not sure, or if you want to see more applications for some of these strides, I definitely recommend you to watch this video. So without any further ado, let's go over the reprint box toppers, which are the full art Kree Elementals. So, starting off we have Sea Breeze. Looks absolutely amazing. We never saw that little gust of wind at the bottom, so it looks super beautiful. Then we have the Air Element Ractome. So this is your discard 1, draw 1 G-Guard, which is also heavily used in a lot of decks, especially ones that run the more traditional draw triggers. Then we have Dismal, whose full art is beautiful. I never noticed that like black orb around it, neither like the claws on top and under it, but this does have a slight misprint in that it says it's a grade 1, and all G-Guards are obviously grade 4, so beautiful reprint, but sadly also a misprint. The same goes for Metal Element Screw. He also is printed as a grade 1 unfortunately, but he also does look quite good, but I think out of all of these he might look the least astounding. Finally, I think one of people's favorites is going to be the Heat Elemental Bobo. So this one has seen a lot of use recently in the Premium Collection meta, whether it's, decks like Oracle Think Tank, or for me personally, I do put Bobo in my Dimension Police as well, so that, I'm not restricted by my damage when I want to go for the game-ending plays. So Bobo is really important, and his full art reprint here is absolutely beautiful. Then we have Light Elemental Honolly, everyone's favorite way to counter multi-attack decks. Looks absolutely amazing, again, just stunning full art, and I'm glad that these are foil too. Then we have Rain Elemental Tier, so this is the countercharger if you don't have a countercharger in your clan, Dimension Police. Although we do have quite a few in Premium, but not in Standard at least. And then finally is Earth Elemental Connell for your, whatever needs you have in terms of getting around mass retiring clans. And the art is actually really pretty. I never noticed that there was a bunch of mini Connells in the art as well. And now let's get into the unique part of this set, which is the Progenitor Dragons. So these bad boys are more or less the same as the Zerath dragons in the way that you acquire them, but they are very different in their application to the game. I already have a video talking about the first two and just kind of like the role of progenitors in general, but here we're going to go over in depth all of them and their applications, or how useful they are in each and every clan. We're going to begin with the one for United Sanctuary, which is Progenitor Dragon of Total Purity, Agnos. He has a continuous G-Zone skill. This card cannot be turned face up by abilities. If this card is face up, you can stride without paying the cost for stride. So this first skill is shared by all Progenitor Dragons, so every single one of them does have it, so you cannot turn it face up with effect. A lot of the strides we're going to look at do ask you to turn G units face up, and so you cannot do that, but if they are face up after you stride them, you can stride for free, which is definitely nice because you do save a card every time you would stride. However, I think in the context of the current meta, this entire gimmick isn't that useful, just because right now we have a lot of really strong first strides, and so a lot of games do end at first or second stride, and so wasting that super impactful first stride just to go into a Progenitor Dragon, doesn't matter of the effect, just to go into them, means that either your first stride isn't strong enough, or you're actually not using your first stride efficiently enough to push for game. Because if you need to rely on the second stride and, you know, rely on having it for free, then that probably means that you're not pushing hard enough. So I think this kind of effect of progenitors might be more applicable in a slower meta, which we might get to eventually, but at the moment I think it's not as effective. But now looking at Agnos's unique skill, he has a Vanguard Circle. When placed, you make Counterblast 1 and Soul Blast 1, and then call as many cards from your hand to all rearguard circles as possible and draw 3 cards. Now let's go over every single clan this applies to and see how applicable it really is. So, first of all, the Paladins. Royals, questionable. Like, in blasters, this can be good depending on your hand. Like, if you've got like Larouses and Flogels and stuff like that in your hand, then sure, you might want to call all of those down and then push for game. But then it's like if you're playing Luard and you already have a big hand and like you don't want to be necessarily sacrificing all your stuff, then this might not be as optimal. Then going to Golds, this is actually pretty good because in Golds, they don't typically have a very big hand and they often do call down everything just to achieve Unite in some contexts. So in that case, you don't really mind calling down everything, and chances are the draw 3 will actually be beneficial to you as well, because you get to call down a bunch of good cards. But do keep in mind that this will clash with your Wonder Azels, because you don't want to be like Wonder Azeling over your progenitor, so do keep that in mind. Then for Angel Feather, I personally don't think this is very good either, because it doesn't, like for the Giza variant, it doesn't bring you closer to that, like at all, and like for the Gavrail loop, it also does not really do much because we need to be holding those specific pieces for the actual loop. So if we're forced to call all of them, like keep in mind that this card will force you to call every single card until every single rearguard circle is occupied, and it also includes like not just occupied circles, even the circles that are occupied you have to call over them. So you really have to call down your whole hand and then draw 3. So like it really is only applicable in golds, which is not the best thing. There's still Oracle Think Tank. Again, it's a clan that likes to build up a big hand and it doesn't really want to call down everything that it's built up until that first strike to lose all of it in one go. So I don't think it's all that great. Obviously you could call down like a Rectangle Magus from this and then use its skill, but do you even have all the resources for that? That's another question. Then for Genesis, I'm pretty sure that should be the last United Sanctuary clan. I think, again, it runs into the same issue where there might be some games where you do want to call them down. Like, I think if you're playing Wiseman, then probably not, because you want to be keeping that Wiseman for when you've set up the right conditions for it. But then if you're playing something just like Himiko, maybe, depending on your hand, you might want to call down everything and draw 3 and then try to, like, push forward through that. But honestly, I think that Agnos might be one of the weakest ones of the progenitors, because this is really only useful, in my opinion, in 2 decks, which is Azel and Altmile in Royals, so that's kind of the only use I really see for this guy. Moving on to Dragon Empire, we have Progenitor Dragon of Lightning Flame Gilgal. So the first skill is the same, so I'll move directly to the second skill. So this is an Act, Vanguard Circle, you may Counterblast 2 and Soul Blast 1, and until end of turn, this unit battles all of your opponent's units in one attack and gets plus 10k power. And the skill, when its attack hits, you may countercharge 1. So the way this is worded obviously means that if you do hit multiple units, you will countercharge multiple times. So if you hit 3 of your opponent's rearguards and their Vanguard, that's going to be a countercharge of 4. So the cost is relatively steep in terms of the Counterblast 2, but if you can get that back with, you know, most certainty, it's going to be pretty good. The only way that a lot of people could play around this is obviously not call that many rearguards, in which case it is going to be weaker and you might not even want to go for it. But other than that, I feel like this is actually the most useful progenitor, just because he actually does something on his own as a stride, and some clans, like Narukami honestly, don't actually mind this kind of effect, because being able to just wipe out your opponent's field for a pretty small cost is also relatively good. The only thing is obviously if your opponent doesn't give you that 2 damage, then you're not really doing much with this stride either, so that's something you need to keep in mind. So as I said, Narukami, it's good. Kagero, between the new Doomjid that we're going to look at and this, I think both are pretty valid targets. So I think, again, for Kagero, this is a relatively good card. And being able to proc any of your effects that say, oh, when an opponent's unit is retired, do this and that, is also going to be great. For Murakumo, not necessarily proccing something in terms of effects, because like if it is hitting, then it's hitting. Obviously, if your opponent guards at least one of these attacks, you will, you know, potentially trigger some Shadow Stitch, but that's something, you know, to consider. So I think, again, it's basically useful for every single clan, and I think it's worth playing for all clans in Dragon Empire. But then we still have Tachikaze, which does receive a super good stride in this set, but this already as well is good for that kind of field wipe, because while they do have some form of retires, I believe they do not have this kind of direct, immediate field wipe that other clans in Dragon Empire do. Then for Nubatama already has a lot of really good strides, but the one problem is that Nubatama did lack a very good first stride, because Shira no Yurine was kind of lacking as a first stride because it's always more powerful once you have that extra crit skill as well, but you won't get that on first stride obviously unless you G-guard before that. So having Gilgal to kind of push through at the start can be good, but again, with all of these scenarios, do keep in mind that you will have to counterblast too, and if your opponent doesn't give you that, then you won't be able to use it. So overall, Gilgal is definitely a very good one. Then the one that applies most to me is the Stargate one, which is Progenitor Dragon of Horizon Limit Origorum. So once again, the same free stride skill as all of them, and the second skill, when it attacks on Vanguard Circle, you may counterblast 1 and increase or decrease the power of all of your opponent's units to 0 until end of turn. So this has quite a few nice applications. So first, looking at Link Joker, let's say, I'm actually surprisingly not looking at Dimension Police first, but with Link Joker, this is nice just in the Messiah variant, just because with Messiahs you're able to actually push out quite a lot of attacks in premium format. So by going into Origorum and pushing your opponent's Vanguard to 0, that is going to be pretty effective. Just keep in mind that by going into Origorum, you're losing out on the super strong strides that Messiah has that actually do unlock your field and make those combos go live. So otherwise you're going to be relying on some of your grade 2s and grade 3s to be doing the locking and actually, pull off some of the combos. So the amount of stuff you might be able to do might not actually be all that great, just because you are limited by not having the stride, because usually in Messiahs, the stride is the one that pushes all the multi-attacks. I think the most applicable version for this card is in Victor, just because in Victor you can actually go into it, push your opponent's Vanguard to 0, but the thing is that this skill goes off on attack, and Zubat Battler Victor gives the skill to a unit to restand something, and usually you want to give that skill to your Vanguard. So in this scenario, you'd actually have to give it to a rearguard, because you don't want to be attacking with your Vanguard first and then restand nothing. So in that case, you need to be careful to not do the standard Victor play when you go into this guy. But other than that, Victor has a lot of attacks. Those attacks do increase in power, so even if your opponent hits a damage trigger, you will still be hitting for relevant numbers. And even if they do, they're going to be at 10k, which most of your units can hit over, at least asking for a 15k shield, and therefore that's going to be very threatening. So I think with Nova Grappler, with Victor specifically, this actually is a pretty valid stride to go into, but obviously Victor does have 2 very strong first strides as well that they have to choose from already. As for Dimension Police, it's kind of hard to say much about this because we don't have a lot of multi-attacking. Looking at some of the cards in My Glorious Justice, we have things like Platinum Ace that gain crit on Rearguard Circle, so it's extra power, it's an extra crit if you've reached the thresholds, which you will be reaching. But the thing is that this won't be as pressuring just because there's no multi-attack as it would be in Victor or in Messiahs in that sense. But the thing is that also we have good first strides like Bravest Peak Excalibur that we tend to want to go for instead. So Origorum will see some use, I think, depending on the deck build, but definitely not in all. So interesting card, but again, not such a widespread use. Moving on to Dark Zone, we have Progenitor Dragon of Gloomy Dark Formido. Once again, first skill is the same everywhere, but the second skill is Vanguard Circle. When placed, you may counterblast 1, and your opponent chooses the same number of their rearguards as the number of your open rearguard circles and retires them. If 3 or more were retired, you soul charge 5 and draw a card. This is interesting because it not only asks you to take first stride, or not necessarily, you could play this as a second stride, but the thing is that it requires your opponent to have a board in order to actually do something, if that makes sense. So not only do you have to already be aware of your own field, which is fine for a lot of these Dark Zone clans because they either put their stuff into the soul after the battle phase, or they time leap it away or bounce it back to hand or whatever, but the thing is that you have to retire 3 of your opponent's rearguards in order to get that soul charge 5 and the extra draw, which is obviously nice. Like, every deck, maybe excluding Gear Chronicle, will enjoy this extra soul charge, but I think it's just a little bit hard to use, and the situations in which you'll use it are going to be quite limited. But if you do manage to retire 3, obviously that will be quite dominating. And if your opponent sets up a board before you even stride, obviously that's going to be great if you can retire 5 for 1 counterblast. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. As for the clans, as I said, Gear Chronicle, probably the least level of applicability. But for decks like Dark Irregulars, for Pale Moon, and for Spike Brothers, they will enjoy that extra soul charge for sure, and the extra card in hand doesn't hurt any clan in particular, so that's always a positive thing. And then next we have Progenitor Dragon of Deep Sea Balanerena. This is the Megalanica one, so this is the fish, the pirate, and the seaman. So same skill as always on the first skill, but then the second skill is quite interesting. When your opponent's Guardian is placed, you may discard a grade 1 or less card from your hand and retire that Guardian. Now, while it does seem quite good in theory, I feel like the applicability of this card in each of the 3 clans of this nation are somewhat limited. So the most obvious one I think is Grand Blue. Like, you would think, oh, being able to discard my pieces is quite cool, except a lot of the pieces that you actually want to be calling from your drop zone are either grade 2s or grade 3s. And the fact that this guy actually limits you to only guarding with grade 1 or less, so like only discarding grade 1 or less, means that your targets are vastly limited. And so you don't want to be discarding your stride fodder or your triggers or your like heal triggers for G guarding, obviously. So whether you do this effect is gonna depend a lot. I think if you pushed your opponent early and you're trying to finish the game there, obviously this will be great, and you will, discard the extra cards even if they're not so optimal just to try to push for game, obviously. But I think otherwise this is gonna see some limited use just because of that clause. So in terms of Bermuda, I don't see much that you would want to discard either, because it's like, do you want to discard your Aquas just to make your Ellie bigger? That's about the only thing I can see in terms of like Ange. But apart from that, unless you really have dead pieces in your hand that you don't care about anymore, or like draw triggers, which you can also discard if they're not the PG draw triggers, then sure, you can do that too. So those are probably going to be the most prime targets for the discard. Then finally, for Aqua Force, it's already a super like piece reliant deck that really needs to draw into everything to be relevant. So I feel like having to discard those pieces that you already struggle to get is going to be a bit of a problem. The only thing that I could potentially see is like if you do have some grade 1 pieces that are part of your Megiddo combo, then this could be like a setup for next turn. But again, that's something I say with doubt. And then the final one is Progenitor Dragon of Regal Birth Megaloma. G-Zone skill is the same, but the second skill is, when placed on a Vanguard Circle, you may discard 2 cards from your hand, and for 1 time during the next turn, when you would lose, return all of the cards from your hand and damage zone to your deck and shuffle it. Put 5 cards from the top of your deck into your damage zone and end that turn instead. So there have been some updates and rulings. You might want to check out W Slasher's video, a very recent video on the update on these rulings, in that if your opponent does deal damage to you and then has some kind of effect, or another way to deal damage on top of that would lead you to being at 6, like you 6 and then 7, but you heal out of, like you Megaloma out of the 6th, you could still take the 7th one to still lose. So I recommend checking that video out for the ruling clarification. But other than that, this is actually a relatively useful one, I feel, just because if you're getting rushed by things like Azel, this could actually be quite good, because you can kind of, prepare to not lose next turn, if that makes sense, and then be able to go for one of your game-ending strides, or even go for the Zoa if you're playing Mega Colony, or if you're playing Great Nature, which is obviously a very big power move. So I think Megaloma is quite good. If I had to rank them, I'd put Gilgal first, then the Origorum, then the Megaloma. I think then I will put the Balanerena, then the Formido, and then the Agnos. So that is kind of my order for these. They are very good cards. They're very situational, but their situations are pretty interesting, and they do have the reward of not needing to worry about stride fodders or drawing into stride fodders once you do stride into them. So that's definitely a very nice clause to have. So that wraps up the discussion of these Progenitor Dragons. I also realized that I didn't say, for Megaloma, the specific clans, but I think for Neo Nectar has almost no application apart from, again, saving yourself from death. And like in Mega Colony, I think as well, you have a very strong first stride in this set that you would rather go to as well, so you don't really go into this in situations where you are really close to losing, and Great Nature, I think the same goes for it as well. Now getting into the actual clan-based strides, we're gonna go over everything, but before we do, it's important to note that each stride comes in their regular form, and then one form with a little stride gold stamp on the top right corner. So these aren't like hugely different in pricing, but some people do like the extra bling, so if you are a fan of that, then I do recommend picking them up. I only picked mine up for literally just my favorite clan, Dimension Police, but if you are a fan of them, do pick them up. So now getting into the actual strides, we're gonna go in order, beginning with Royal Paladin's Divine Knight of Twin Absolutes, Saint of Twin Sword. So the Grade 2 Twin Sword is back with even more abs than usual, and he has two skills. The first skill is when he attacks a Vanguard while being boosted, you may counterblast one and turn a card from your G-Zone face up. You search your deck for up to 2 Grade 2 cards, call them to rearguard circles, and shuffle your deck. So this has two interesting applications in two different decks. So the first one of which is the Alfred deck that saw quite a bit of use but has dropped significantly since then, which uses cards like Larus to search out your high beasts if you are on an Alfred. So you can actually call out your Laruses to use the skill to search out the Floral Paladin Flogel to then restand your Blaster Blades and try to finish them off like that. The other more kind of relevant in the current meta path is actually Blasters. So Blasters received a lot of support in VEB06 with, you know, Messianic Lord, or Messianic Lord Blaster, as it's supposed to be pronounced. With that deck, obviously you got a lot of different interesting Grade 2s like Blaster Rapier, but that's not the point of this discussion. But what you do have as a target is the favorite Pupil of Light and Dark Liu, which is a really good multi-attacker and something that can extend your attacks further and, you know, search out your Blaster Blades. It doesn't have to even be Blaster Blade, it just has to be a Blaster card that can then attack one more time and keep hitting for big numbers. And thing is that it can also search, because it says any Grade 2 card with Blaster in its card name, because of the rules of Premium, you can search out the new Blaster Dark as well, and upon calling it, also be able to counterblast one to retire something. Obviously that is a lot of counterblast that adds up, that depends on your game state, that depends on how much damage your opponent is actually giving you, so if you only have that one damage to use for Saint of Twin Sword, obviously your plays will be relatively limited, so you need to think about that as well. But this does open up a lot of paths. It is a multi-attack combo as well. Overall, just a very strong stride. And on top of that, he does have the second skill, which is when your rearguard is placed from deck, that unit gets plus 5k power until end of turn for each face-up card in your G-Zone. Obviously, if you're first striding this without any G-guarding, they will only get an extra plus 5k once, and that's it. But if you do stride this further into the game, this might, you know, go up to plus 20k, plus 30k, so it's definitely a very exciting stride to get for Royals, and it's put to good use in a lot of decks. Moving on, we have arguably the #1 stride that people are claiming in this whole set, which is the esteemed deity of abundant waters, Ichikishima. Now, as we get to this card, I want to mention that over the coming few days, maybe even weeks, I will be doing critical analyses of some of the best strides in this set. So just videos dedicated to one stride, talking about their strengths, the other cards you can use with them in terms of build, and just a lot of different uses that you can make for the card, you know, ways to go around them, ways to play around them, and just the relevant information that you would need when using or playing against a deck that would use that stride. So I hope that's going to be useful for whether it's, you know, Premium veterans or those of you that are getting into Premium, so that's something to look forward to. But without any further ado, let's go over the new Ichikishima. So she has an Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may counterblast one and turn a G unit face up. You draw one, and until end of turn, your opponent cannot use the auto abilities of Guardians, and this unit gets the continuous skill, Oracle. All of your front row units get plus 2k for each card in your hand. Now, before we go to the discussion, I need to mention the second part of this skill because it amplifies the first part. G-Zone continuous skill. If this card is face up, when you would count the number of cards in your hand, include the face-up cards in your G-Zone. So this skill means that when you count for Oracle, for example, or for Ichikishima's own Oracle skill, the face-up G units that you have, as long as there's a copy of Ichikishima face-up, will count towards that total. So that is very, very good. But let's talk about that first skill. So pointing out the obvious, the elephant in the room, this stops Perfect Guards, because Perfect Guard abilities are auto abilities. So that already is stopped. Then it also stops You guessed it, most G-Guards. Because most G-Guards have abilities, but those abilities are auto when placed, da ba da ba da ba da. So that's the thing. This stops a lot of those abilities. However, it does not stop G-Guards with a continuous ability. The elephant in the room in this case being the Ellie, which is Bermuda Triangle's main G-Guard that gets a lot of defensive power as well. So that's the kind of deck that has an okay matchup against this. But if you're playing Azel, your Slimy Flare, useless. So there's a lot of clans that have, like, if you look through your G-Zone, you'll notice that most of your G-Guards do have auto abilities in terms of when they, are placed on the Guardian Circle, which makes sense, and those are all turned off. So what do people do against this? Well, you still have the high-powered triggers to guard against this, but keep in mind that the front row is getting a lot of power, and there are still cards in the clan itself that can power up even more, like Nanase or Nazna as well. So that's something you need to keep in mind, because those cards will be gaining power, will be becoming stronger and better, and thus, Ichikishima will be super threatening. Another thing to note that I'll talk about more in the dedicated video to Ichikishima is that Ryo Gyoza used the strategy around her super well, of just pushing an early game with magic numbers and manipulating triggers with a lot of the Megas cards and Bobo, and then being able to just finish off the game on a first stride Ichikishima after pushing the opponent to 4 damage already, because at that point they just don't have enough to guard at that stage yet, especially if they try to guard earlier as well. So that is a huge pressure point of Oracle Think Tank and Premium right now. It's looking to be super strong, and this stride is very good. Then we go into the biggest disappointment for me in this set, which is Angel Feather's Evangel Seraph Raphael Mitra. She has one skill, which is an Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may counterblast 3 and turn a card from your G-Zone face up. You then discard 2 cards from your hand and heal 2. Now, I was really looking forward to receiving a stride that would help the Gavriel loop strategy, but instead what we got is support for a strategy that is already looking pretty bad, which is Gize. So Gize hasn't really seen any kind of relevant results in a long time. It's been just kind of falling down, down, and down, and down, especially because V-triggers already get around it, but then you have a lot of clans now that can hit for big numbers, that can easily get around Gize and aren't afraid of it anymore, and just Gize is just becoming an extinct strategy. And all that this stride really does is heal 2, so you have 2 more damage checks to see, your Zerath's bound face up just to go into Gize. So I was quite disappointed by this. Counterblast 3 is also a huge cost that I'm not very happy to be playing, and not a lot of opponents will give you that much Counterblast on first stride either. So this is not a first stride in my opinion either, and we did need a better first stride too, so that's very unfortunate. And the fact that it discards 2 is also pretty unfortunate. Like, it could have been just like rescue check 2 and then heal the cards after the rescue. It could have been a lot of other things. I understand wanting to discard for a double heal, but having to counterblast 3 and discard 2 feels a little bit too much. So I hope that makes sense in saying this, but I was not very pleased with the Angel Feather stride. Another of the strides that will be featured in a separate video is Drag Principal Morfessa. Now this, in my opinion, is one of the best strides coming from this set. It has a lot of insane power, a lot of cool combos, and a lot of cool ways to set it up and make sure that it pops off. But first, let's go over the skills. So, Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may counterblast 1 and turn a G unit face up, and also retire 2 rear guards. Then you draw 2, so it makes up for the retire 2, and until end of turn, you regard trigger units in your drop zone as grade 1. What does that mean? It counts towards your ritual count. So all of your triggers that you retired or you guarded with or anything like that will count towards your ritual count, which is very important because that makes this a very potent first stride because you can actually set up that drop zone much easier now. On top of that, one of the best targets for this card is Belial Owl, because if you have 2 Belial Owls on the field and you use Morfessa's skill to retire them, you're drawing a total of 4 cards for counterblast 1 and retire 2, and that retire is good for you anyway because those Belials now count towards your ritual count. And now speaking of ritual count, this is the fun part, ritual 10 on Vanguard Circle. All of your front row units get power plus 15k plus 1 crit, and when your opponents would guard from their hand, it's a battle door effect, so they must call 2 or more guardians at the same time. So really good card. Obviously super strong. Every single thing in your front row gets this, which means that if you can multi-attack, which the deck can, you will be applying that extra power boost and extra crit boost to the newly called units as well, which is absolutely amazing, just incredible. So I'm gonna look at more detail on how to apply this, you know, in the specific deck when we look at it, and also a lot of the weaknesses, but immediately it does require some setup. Obviously, you know, it requires you to have a pretty good momentum. If you open the main, that's obviously much better, and it's such a strong first try that any opponent that knows about it will try to delay it. They'll try to not give you the first try, they'll try to fight the grade 2 game. Luckily, Shadows also have a lot of good resources to fight the grade 2 game. You have Maka, you have Nemain, you have Karen, all great cards that help you survive it. So this card is just really good, and there's a lot of cards that bring it out. I think the most obvious card that brings out that second skill is obviously the Drag Fencer Dagda, who only needs Ritual 5 to, when it attacks, counterblast 1, retire something else, and then search 2 other grade 1s. But you do have cards in the deck, like Slaptail, that regard themselves as grade 1 in the deck, so therefore you can choose them with Dagda to call out. So you search out a grade 2 and a grade 1, put them in one column, and then they're going to get the plus 15k boost and the extra crit, and there you go, you just made another attack with a lot of power, an extra crit, and the Battle Door effect. Therefore it's super threatening. If you can push your opponent in the early game, if you can win the grade 2 game and then go for this, it's really hard to lose, honestly. Like, this card is insanely good. If you can also set up 2 Belial Owls behind it to use for the first skill, then you're definitely in a super good position. Up next, we have Golden Dragon Spear X Dragon. So this is Azel getting just more Azel. So first skill, G-Zone Act, Unite. So that means you have to have called 2 cards before that. If your Vanguard is grade 3, you may counterblast 2 and discard a card from your hand to stride this card in your Vanguard circle from face down. So this basically goes around the stride ruling, in which you need to check for your opponent to be a grade 3. But here, you only need to be a grade 3 yourself, so it's kind of like a Die-Hawk almost, but from the G-Zone, which is super good, because here, you can go, you know, going first, go into your Bowmains, search your Azel, and then you're able to immediately counterblast 2, discard 1, go into this guy. So super good, but obviously is easy to counterplay. A lot of people now know that you can just not give your opponent the 2 damage, and then oops, they can't do this anymore. So does need 2 damage to go off, which is quite a lot. If your opponent doesn't give it to you, then it's not going to happen, but definitely very good. The other strength is actually the second skill, which is an Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may Soul Blast 1 and flip a G-Unit face up. You look at the top 5 and call 2 to rearguard circles and shuffle your deck. Why this is good is that previously, whenever Azel wanted to, you know, go for their first stride, it would be the Gurguit that would need Unite to actually get the extra drive check. So sometimes you'd be forced to call down your triggers just to trigger the Unite. But here, you don't even need to call down anything. You just go into this guy. Even if you go into him as a normal stride, then you can just Soul Blast 1, flip a G-Unit, look at top 5, call 2. Basically costless, and that's really nice because you don't have to call down all this stuff from your hand anymore, which is really cool. Obviously, if you want to get that stride skill off, you will have to call down 2 to fulfill Unite, but other than that, this is a super good card and just a massive boost to Azel, just absolutely huge. The next one is Complete Beauty Amaruda Afros. So she has Revelation, which, you know, does let you look at the top cards and set up, but the first proper skill is an Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may counterblast 1 and flip a G-Unit face up. Until end of turn, one of your rear guards gets plus 10k power and plus 1 crit, and if your soul has 4 or less cards, you draw 2 and soul charge 5. So that's great. You give a rear guard extra pressure, and you get to set up your soul if you don't have enough, and that also benefits you by drawing extra cards. So if anything, you want to keep your soul relatively low in order to actually push through and get that extra advantage from this skill. But if you do have a great setup soul, I mean, you can set up a soul with her and then a couple of soul charges for that second skill, which is at the end of battle that she attacked, you may Soul Blast 15 to stand one of your rear guards, and until end of turn, your opponent cannot perfect guard from hand. Not just against that unit, but against anything this turn. So if you got more multi-attacks, I'm looking at you, wise man, then no perfect guards. Just absolutely insane and very, very big. Now, I received some advice from one of our community members. So this is Medicus, who you can find on Twitter, who is a pretty avid player of Genesis, and so he gave me some advice on the use of this card. He did say that it feels more like a buff to pure Revelation, and the Soul Charge 5 and the fact that it makes your rearguards beefier is definitely nice. It also has a nice interaction with the Grade 2 Wiseman, which unfortunately isn't released in English yet, but for those of you that play the Japanese format will be able to use it, in that you can stack Force 1 with Himiko or Iwagana Hime on it, and then call a unit, buff it with Amaruda, stack the stand with Dark Wolf Fenrir or Revelation, and then swing with the Force 1, then swing with the Vanguard, stand the Force 1 unit, and then swing with Wiseman, Soul Blast a Taro, and restand the buffed unit again. So that's a nice little interaction that you can definitely use with this card. The other selling point that he pointed out is that she does have nice legs, which I do have to agree on as well. Another thing that he said is that this Amaruda also makes just pure Himiko a little bit more viable in Premium, as she doesn't have a built-in Soul Charge engine, so this does provide that. You can do things like Soul Blast 3 for Iwagana Hime, and then put a heal in Soul, and then flip Amaruda for a 43k 2 crit rearguard, and that's definitely very threatening on first try. And the deck does have a pretty nice way to fight people that play Grade 2 game, in that you can just go up to the Himiko immediately and proc her skill to get it, your triggers off, and so that's definitely going to be pretty threatening in that sense, even if you can't stride. So basically, she's not the biggest buff to pure Wiseman, but to all the other Genesis decks, this is definitely a very useful tool and definitely worth to take a look at. Moving on to Dragon Empire, the first card we have is Flare General Doomjid Valor for Kagero. So he does have the Blaze keyword, meaning you do need to have more rearguards than your opponent, but if you're playing Kagero, that shouldn't be a problem. So he has a Vanguard Circle. When you stride him, you make Counterblast 1 and flip a G unit face up, then choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it, and then he gains a plus 15k power buff until end of turn for every Sentinel in your drop zone. So if you've PG'd before that, he'll be getting extra buffs, which is definitely very nice and definitely very useful. Then his second skill, which is what makes him very unique, is a once per turn, when your opponent's Sentinel or G-Guardian is placed, you may stand this blazing unit and it loses 1 drive check. Obviously that's once per turn, but that's a very strong skill. The only downside of that is that it does force you to attack with the Vanguard first, because obviously this won't work if your Vanguard is still standing and your opponent PGs your rearguard or G-guards against your rearguard. So you have to attack with him first, and then if your opponent does that, then you can get the skill off. But obviously he's attacking for a lot of power with a restand, and it's just overall very good because he doesn't actually cost anything either, because a lot of the other Kagero cards that restand ask you to discard X number of cards, whereas he doesn't actually care about that, because he pops your opponent's units, he gains a bunch of power, and then he restands for free on top of that with a somewhat limited condition. So overall, very good card. Obviously, if your opponent hard guards everything with just like raw triggers, then he won't go off. But if your opponent perfect guards or G-guards, even once on that turn, he will be restanding, and that is a very threatening skill. The next one is Nubatama's Enma Stealth King Mujin Lord Dagoku. So he has a Dominate skill, which says Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may Counterblast 1 and flip a G-unit face up. Your opponent chooses 2 face-up G-units with power from his or her G-zone and calls them to Rearguard Circle. Your opponent cannot use their auto abilities. You dominate them and attack your opponent's Vanguard one at a time. During that battle, their auto abilities can be used as if they were on Vanguard Circle, and then at the end of the turn, you return them back to the G-zone of your opponent. So the interesting thing about this card is that depending on the matchup, this will lead to a lot of really cool results. So like even looking at the previously discussed Doomjid, like if you attack your opponent with the Doomjid that you stole, and then the Sentinel or G-guard it, it's gonna restand and still be able to attack. And it doesn't matter that it's only attacking for a 15k, because it's still gonna be an extra attack, so your opponent has to hit like a damage trigger or something, and that's definitely very threatening. There are some strides where, this won't be as useful. Like we already looked at stuff like the Spear X Dragon that only has act abilities, the Morfessa that only has an act and a continuous, or then even like with Saint of Twin Sword, he does have an auto, but it requires him being boosted, which is not going to happen in Dominate. So some strides obviously will just be 15k beaters, but it's still pretty nice in that sense. I received some advice from community member Louis, I'll leave a link to his Twitter in the description, where this is actually a good option against Protect decks, which Nubatama didn't have as much of a good matchup against before, because versus a Protect deck that has no field, you can go into the Dagoku and then the Crow to make them discard 5, which is just a nice option to have. So he says that Nubatama didn't necessarily need a new powerful stride to win, it just needed another option. Tachikaze has actually received a new stride that opened up the possibility for an entirely new deck build in Premium. So, Unrivaled Ruler Gluttony Nebulos. He also has a misprint that I'll talk about when we get to it. So first of all, Engorge. Nice to have, you know, it is still the, Gluttony stride. It's not Dogma, it is Nebulos. But he has a skill, when it becomes engorged, choose 2 of your opponent's rearguards and retire them. And then cost, you may flip a unit face up, and then this is where the misprint comes in. So the text should say, put a total of 5 equipped gauge or rearguards into drop zone. So either you sack 5 or you sack 5 of your equipped gauges, and then, if you do, you stand him. So he's a restander, but you do have to either discard a bunch of stuff or remove a bunch of gauge, or, you know, either or. You can do both at the same time, like, you know, 3 gauge and 2 rearguards. But that's really nice because it doesn't cost anything else. No soul blasting, no counter blasting, nothing. So it's free, and that's very cool. Then he has an axe skill in the G zone, which is once per turn. If this card is face up, you may soul blast 1 and put a card from the top of your deck face down as an equip gauge for one of your rearguards, and it becomes engorged until end of turn. So not only does it give you equip gauge to your, like, you know, through the G zone essentially, but it also makes things engorged, which is really nice. Just, it literally gives you everything you could ask for in Tachikaze. Now, I received some advice from Spec on my Discord, so I don't know if he has a Twitter or anything. I'll ask him if there's anything I can link, but he is on my Discord under the name of Spectral Kooky. So he's actually one of the prominent tabletop simulator plugin owners. So he told me that there is essentially a loop build now for the Tachikaze build in Premium that uses mostly just the standard deck, so you essentially just use a lot of the equip gauge cards. That involves basically just obliterating your entire deck size from Tachikaze means, you know, by just getting a bunch of equip gauges. But essentially, to actually get the skill off, you have cards like Blytops and Lacera Terex to, you know, you can convert them with the gauge to still get a lot of extra advantage on top of that. So it shapes up to be a super good card. And a lot of the cards in the standard version of Tachikaze do give you extra equip gauge to do the restands. And the card that actually does kind of like push through with that, like the loop that I meant, is the Koala Magnum. So I don't know particularly how the loop works, but if you join my Discord, there are quite a few people that do play it, so you will receive more information in that sense. Then moving on to Murakumo, we have Ambush, Demon, Stealth Dragon, Shibaraku, Victor. So there's 3 Victors now in Vanguard. We have the Murakumo Victor, the Nova Grappler Victor, and the Bravest Victor Grand Gallop. So he has 2 effects once again. An act on Vanguard Circle that's once per turn. You may Soul Blast 1 and flip a unit face up. Reveal the top 7 cards of your deck. Put up to 2 of them with the same card name as the card on your rearguard circle or in your drop zone from among them into your hand and shuffle your deck. This is really cool because I received once again some advice from Louis in how this is useful, in that you basically have one big positive effect to it, is that you can search your combo pieces for the loop. This includes stuff like the Metamorphox, the Stand Trigger, the Dual Weapon, and the Tanba that essentially give you infinite attacks and infinite power in this Murakumo loop, and so he helps you to set up for it very well with that first skill. Other than that, it's still going to be a good skill to search pieces with. Then the second skill is Shadow Stitch, G-Zone. When your rearguard attacks a Vanguard and doesn't hit, if this card is face up, you may Soul Blast 1 to call him to rearguard circle. So this is really huge in a build more focused on Shirayuki, because with Shirayuki you're minusing your opponent's power, and so you're able to actually extend by calling the Shibaraku Victor from your G-Zone. And again, this isn't once per turn, so if you have 2 of these face up in the G-Zone, you can basically just call 2 if your rearguard doesn't hit. So like, let's say you've attacked with both, one of them hit, the second one didn't, then you just use both of your Shibaraku Victors to call down both and still get 2 more attacks out on your opponent's Vanguard that has minus power because of the Shirayuki. So very cool stride, has a lot of interesting applicability, and so I like it a lot for that reason. Now sadly, yet another one of my favorite clans that got pretty much the short end of the stick is Narukami. So they received Conquering Supreme Dragon Conquest Fulgurate. So he has one skill, which is an act Vanguard Circle once per turn. Thunderstrike X. You may flip a unit face up and discard 1. Choose the same number of your opponent's rearguards as the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone, retire and bind them, and all of your units get plus 1k until end of turn for each card in your opponent's bind zone. If your opponent's bind zone has 7 or more cards, until end of turn, he gets an extra drive check. Then, if it has 10 or more cards, it gets crit plus 1. Now, if this card had released during the G era, it would have been better, but unfortunately, as it is right now, this really is not what Narukami needed, especially because between the end of G Narukami and the current Narukami, like the current Narukami just straight up binds, whereas the end of G Narukami with Vanquisher did retire and bind, and that's why with cards like the Phoenix, we're not able to actually use it because it goes through retire and then bind rather than straight to bind, and that's the problem. Now the thing is that also, you only retire bind up to the same number as the face-up G units, so it's like on first strike, you're only doing it to 1, which is not even that scary. Obviously, in the early game, you could have potentially bound some more cards, but you're not going to have 7 bound cards on first stride, or even 10, you know? Just because your opponent won't have called that many rear guards before first stride to the front row for you to actually hit them. So this card feels like it's lacking. I feel like the 7 and 10 are just way too much. If that was like 3 and 4, crazy. Or like even 3 and 5 I think is more doable. But 7 and 10 is just really hard to get to, and I feel like that condition kind of ruined the card. That's what I feel. Maybe this will be better in a slower meta. Obviously it's better as like a second or a third stride, but in this meta you are not gonna often see a second or a first stride, especially if you're playing Narukami. So maybe it'll get better with the upcoming Narukami support if it's really like a lot of good on-ride effects and good early game or other ways to bind, but apart from that, it's not looking too good. Going into Stargate, we have Universe Ace Bustard. So I already have a video talking about this guy, so if you want more thoughts on him, you can already check that out. But this is going to be interesting because it's been quite a while since that video came out, so I can go over some other thoughts about this card. So, first skill is, when your rear guard stands, you may Soul Blast 1 and turn a unit face up, and this unit gets Drive +1 until end of turn. Obviously, this is great. You need to have Soul to set it up, so keep that in mind. I didn't mention that in the original video, but you do need a resourceful, a reliable way to set up that resource, so things like Shout are actually used quite often because he can give you extra Soul, and you also flip up your G units face up very fast. I commentated a VGCS match in which one of the players was able to use this skill on the first stride to then go into the GB8 on the second stride. That's how many G units you can really flip in that one turn and how many extra drive checks you can gain. So obviously that's very good. Then what do you do with all those drive checks? Well, the second skill. Vanguard Circle, at the end of the battle he attacked, if his drive check is 5 or more, you can discard 3 cards from your hand to stand him and he loses 5 drives. So if you have 8, then you're going to be able to discard 3, restand, and still keep 3 drive checks. So that's very cool. So great card because you can go through a lot of triggers, and obviously if you're running like an aggressive critical trigger lineup, that's going to be very powerful because he's going to restand with a bunch of crits. But this is also not once per turn, so you can potentially do that restand skill several times. Obviously you are losing 5 drive checks every time, and I highly doubt, actually I think it's impossible to get, you know, like over 10 drive checks or something, or even over 8 is already difficult. So keep that in mind. He's a very good card. He's a very good first stride. Hits for huge number, like it doesn't hit for huge numbers actually, that's what the Victor does, but he hits for a huge drive check, which can lead to huge numbers, you know, through your drive checks, and that's a lot of pressure for your opponent. And the fact that he can then restand with like 3 crits on him or something, and if your opponent doesn't have a perfect guard, then that's going to be pretty sore. So super good card, definitely very strong, and I've already commented the game and I've made a video on him. You can definitely see why he's a very good card. Next up is my baby that got a very bad treatment, which is Strongest Command Chief Final Dimax DX. And sadly, very, very sadly, he does not contain the Dimensional Robo name. Despite his original form having it, for some reason he didn't retain it, and that's a very big issue. But anyway, let's go over his skill. Vanguard Circle when he attacks. You turn a card from your G-Zone face up and put all resting rear guards into your soul. You reveal the top 7 from your deck, call up to the same number of cards as the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone from among them to rearguard circles in order of highest power to lowest power, I mean that's not part of the skill, and then shuffle your deck. If you put 4 more cards into your soul for this cost, all of your units get plus 10k, plus 1 crit until end of turn. So for a while, I forgot the fact that this didn't have Dimensional Robo in its name, so it was like, oh, we could potentially use Diehawk and like go first stride into Dimax with Diehawk, call nothing, and then search a piece and just like move on. But now that I realize that he doesn't have Dimensional Robo in his name, it's really pretty weak. This is good in late game where you can afford to put 4 cards into your soul, and as I said in my original video reacting to him, you can use something like so you can use something like Weaking to turn all that soul into something else, but with My Glorious Justice, we'll be using a lot of soul anyway, like Die Dragon already uses soul, Die Liner uses soul, so a lot of stuff uses soul in the deck now, and it's important to keep that there anyway, so I don't know if it's really that necessary. On top of that, I mean, I guess as a late game, as I said, late game you could potentially put 4 or 5 cards into soul and then just pump out a whole other field. Like if you have 5 face-up G units, like 4 before striding this, then striding him to turn up the 5th one, then if you can, or even 4, you know, 4 is enough because 4 is just like your 2 new attackers and 2 new boosters. So if you like had a first stride, then G-guarded and then went into him, you can actually have a pretty threatening second stride in that, you know, everything gets plus 10k, everything gets a crit. The boosters don't really matter if they get a crit or not, but I mean, the attackers obviously do matter. But so it's kind of threatening in that sense, but it only becomes threatening from second stride onwards, so that's kind of the problem. At least Obadi drew him, that's the one thing I can be happy about, but other than that, lacking card might get better once the format slows down a little bit. Finally, we have Link Joker, Death Star Vader Glue Ball Avalanche. G-Zone. If you have 2 or more face-up, Glue Ball Avalanche face-up in your G-Zone, then when your opponent's card will be unlocked, you bind it face down instead. So let's say it's problematic, because it doesn't work with Chaos. So this, despite being Star Vader support, doesn't work with the main Star Vader, which is problematic, because it has to be bound, which is, I mean, fine, I guess. But then you don't, like, get to do anything else after that, so that you just make your opponent lose stuff, which you're gonna make them do anyway, so that's a bit of a problem. And sometimes you just want to keep them locked anyway, like you want them to be Omega locked and just not be able to use those circles throughout the duration of the game. It's kind of like a lot of Star Vaders, you know, that's their main thing. So the fact that this doesn't actually let you do that is a bit problematic. Maybe future Link Joker support will work better with this, but right now it does not. Second skill is Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. You may Soul Blast 1 and turn a G unit face up, choose 2 of your opponent's rear guards and lock them, and all your front row units get plus 2k until end of turn for each of your opponent's locked cards and face down cards in their bind zone. There, again, they're trying to kind of put together the V-Series cards together with the old Lock cards, but honestly, if you're playing Lock, you're probably not playing that many of the Bind cards, and if you're playing the Bind cards, you're probably not playing that much Lock either, so I feel like it doesn't mesh that well, and it would have been more optimal if they just picked one of the mechanics and stuck with it. That's what the Gear Chronicles stride does, that's what a lot of these strides do. They just pick one mechanic and stay with it, and that's it. Then we have Spike Brothers with Shoot Down Sovereign Violence Ace. His first skill is an act once per turn. You may counterblast 1 and flip a unit face up to draw cards equal to the number of face up cards in your G zone until end of turn. He gets the act Vanguard Circle. You may Soul Blast 1 and one of your units gets plus 10k until end of turn. Now this is interesting because, I mean, on a first try this will be just a draw of 1, but it will go up in that sense. Unfortunately, I didn't reach out to Living Proof for advice on this card, but he does have a video, if I'm not mistaken, dedicated to it, so I definitely recommend that you check it out for like the best possible analysis of this card. But the nice thing of the skill that he gains is that it's not once per turn, so you can actually Soul Blast 1 as much as you want to build up extra power. And then the thing is, like, you don't really have restanders in Spikes, but you do have the ability to bind them and then bring them back, which unfortunately will make the power go away, and since this skill is only in the main phase, that's the only time you're going to get to power up. But it's still important, I think, and it's still important for hitting good numbers against a lot of decks, so it's definitely worth to keep in mind. And then the second skill is Auto Vanguard Circle. When the number of your opponent's guardians becomes 2 or more, you may counterblast 1 and put a rearguard into your soul to call a card from hand to rearguard circle. Also, this is a very cool skill because this means that it's almost like a battle door effect, except that if your opponent does guard with more than one card, so if one G-guard isn't enough and they have to add something else to it, you can literally just counterblast 1 to suck something in and call something from hand. So it really is very Spike Brothers, let's say, and as a first try this will be very strong if you don't know, like with force markers and everything, because you'll be able to abuse circles like that to just keep calling down cards and pushing out more and more attacks. Spike Brothers have been strong this entire year just because they have cards like Agrius that already did something like this, that just pushed huge attacks and then had the stand trigger that like makes even more attacks and everything. So the fact that this is even stronger and even better is just so good. So I think this card is really good. Again, for more analysis, I highly recommend that you check out Living Proof's channel because he does cover Spike Brothers in very high depth. And now the card that like I cannot talk about too much just because this video will literally get too long, so we'll talk about it in a separate video. Evil God Pontiff Gastil Daimonas. First skill is simple and easy to understand. When a card is put into your soul, All front row units get plus 3 cancel of turn. This will stack every time you soul charge. It'll stack huge front row, big first stride, kill potential, just very big. Overall, just big. Second skill is where it gets interesting. Vanguard Circle, act once per turn. You make almost one, flip a unit face up. Search your deck for any 2 cards, put them into your soul and shuffle your deck. This unit gets all of the abilities of the cards put into your soul by this effect until end of turn. What this means is, you can take a Forerunner and an NLK to then be able to call out this guy by the Forerunner skill and still do the NLK with his skill. So, he gains stuff like NLK. He can gain Legion if you want to give him Legion. He can gain Master of Fifth Element skill if you want him to gain Master of Fifth Element skill. He can gain such a wide array of skills that the amount of deck building you can do with this card is insane. You want to play Blade Wings? Play Blade Wings. You can give Blade Wing skills to this guy. Like, not just competitive. This card opens up so many like casual play options too. If you want to just have fun with deck building and playing fun decks that aren't like top meta with your friends, literally a perfect card. None of these strides are expensive either. The most they go for is $5, like, or $6 maybe. But seriously, this card is super good. Really good first stride kill potential. Just overall really good. I need to cover this in a separate video because it'll take too long. But also just amazing for any casual deck building as well. Then we have Fancy Megatrick Dark Lord Princess. This card has a really cool mechanic as well that it's kind of similar to what we just talked about with the Gastille in terms of the Forerunner effect. So her skill is, at the end of the battle that you attack the Vanguard, you can flip a unit face up to stride a face up unit with power and the Magi ability from your G-Zone on your Vanguard circle as stand, and that unit gets drive -2 until end of turn. If you stride, call her to rearguard circle. So this literally means you swing with her, flip a G unit, literally doesn't cost anything, and then the G unit that you flip, which will usually be the Harry stride that we got as a promo in GBT 14, and then you stride into him. You can still do all your Magia plays and shenanigans with him, but you basically got GB2, an extra Vanguard attack with 1 drive check for no cost, and then like an extra rearguard to attack with, all in one skill. This card is really good. I'd like to thank Louis once again for telling me about that play, but I have not seen this card in play yet, but I feel like the potential that it has is insane. This also goes together like in the loop build of Pale Moon with the Songstress. Like, I haven't seen that deck in action yet either, but just from talking to people like Solemn Vanguard, it seems to be a very strong contender. So, simple skill but super effective and pushes out a lot of pressure. Then we have the ex-main character, Gear Chronicle, Interdimensional Dragon Mystery Build Dragon. So this dude is pretty cool, and he does put Gear Chronicle back into their roots as well, away from the Zodiac Time Beasts. So, Vanguard Circle and G-Zone Continuous. If this card is face up, during your turn, all units with the Time Leap ability get plus 3k. Very cool because it's both a Vanguard Circle and G-Zone Circle. I mean, not G-Zone Circle, just G-Zone skill to give that extra plus 3k that will let you kind of adapt to the new like force and protect numbers of the grade 3s to actually hit for magic numbers. So it's already pretty, you know, it's a nice skill to have. Then Time Leap, Vanguard Circle. When he attacks, you may Soul Boss 1 and flip a unit face up. Time Leap up to the same number of your rearguards as the number of face up cards in your G-Zone. So unfortunately, won't be all that great on first stride. But this does go back to Time Leap, meaning that you'll be able to use Melem and all the other stuff. I'm pretty sure a lot of the Time Leap cards got unlimited too, you know, ever since the first big restrictions. So this will definitely open up a lot of really cool plays. And so first stride potential, not that huge, but anything after that, after you've G-guarded and stuff, is going to be massive because you can start time leaping your whole boards and then still time leaping with those cards and still doing like the Melem or Watar, etc. combos on top of that. Our next one is the Big Ghost, which is Ghosty Great Emperor Big Obadiah for Grand Blue. He has 1 skill, but it is quite good. Act Vanguard Circle once per turn, you may Counterblast 1 and flip a unit face up. Search your deck for up to 5 cards total, put them into your drop zone, shuffle your deck, and call up to 2 cards from your drop zone to rearguard circles for each face up card in your G zone, and they get plus 5k until end of turn. This guy does everything in 1 skill. He searches for 5 different things to mill, then he lets you call 2 for each face up. So on first stride you're already calling 2, on second stride, even if you didn't G-guard, well actually on second stride you'll have 2 face up already, and then if you flip another one you have 3, so you can call a full field already, which is really insane. And so on top of that they get plus 5k, that 5k is static, it doesn't go up or down, but The thing is, and I received this from, the almighty Solemn Vanguard, he says that this is a sick starter card, but he doesn't necessarily create new combos. He just speeds up what Granblue already did. What's interesting is that you can now fill your entire deck with good stuff Inc. 1-ofs, and he'll fetch them anyway. He also sets up Megiddo really hard, because you can mill 4 Skull Dragons and 1 Night Storm, so your drop is insta-ready for the combo. Also, in terms of My Glorious Justice, he says that one funny trick is that he can mill King Tentacle on first rights. Now you get 3 calls, 1 King from his own skill and 2 from Obadiah, though he doubts that people will actually run King Tentacle. So this is pretty cool because it sets you up, gives you combos, and as he said, also sets up for Megiddo really well. So that's definitely a very nice thing to have. So overall, a really great card, and with My Glorious Justice will only get better. Now we're going to take a look at Bermuda, dominating in Standard, also in Premium, but this not because of this stride. So, Dearly Desired Grand Stage Shandi. She has Harmony, so if you do call something behind her, she will go into Harmony, and if 6 or more of your units are in Harmony, she gains a crit for each face-up card in your G-Zone. So 1 face-up already means an extra crit, but if you have like 5 face-up, that's +5 hitting for that OTK. Then Vanguard Circle, when she attacks, you may counterblast 1 and flip a unit face up. Look at the top 10 cards of your deck, call up to the same number of cards as the number of units in Harmony from among them to rearguard circles, and shuffle your deck. So if you only have her and her booster in Harmony, that's just going to be a call of 2. But if you actually play a Harmony build, then you're going to be able to profit off of this very well. So it supports more of the legacy support here and there. But there are a lot of Harmony cards that you could potentially splash into this deck, so you can actually run like Shizuka's and stuff to make use of it. And I received some advice from Luxus Solaris, so from the community, in terms of what decks bring her out even better. So he said one of the decks is G Highlander and Pure Melody that use her to the fullest. In G Highlander, because Highlander's skills are resolved on ride, you're able to ride Aneska and then stride into Shandi at the same time, thus being able to make use of both skills. Another thing to mention is that because Shandi checks for units in Harmony, if you harmonize Shandi's column, you get +2 on board, obviously as we already mentioned. And in a similar vein, if you use Laura's skill to set up a Harmony board, you're able to use Shandi to call another full board on top of that, so definitely very nice. So Shandi's an interesting card. She's not necessarily a super big buff to the current Bermuda decks like Anj, but still very good card. Next up, we have arguably one of my favorite arts from this set, which is Torrent of Determination Valios Revive. So this is Aquaforce's new stride. He has 1 skill, Vanguard Circle. When he attacks, you may counterblast 1 and flip a unit face up. Call up to 2 cards from your hand to rearguard circles for each face-up card in your G-Zone. So if it's 1, you call 2, if it's 2, you call 4, etc. Draw cards equal to the number of cards called, so it breaks even. If your G-Zone has 2 or more face-up cards, choose one of your opponent's Vanguards and until end of turn, increase or decrease its power to 11k, and its power cannot increase or decrease other than by this effect and Guardian's Shield. So this is a very good card. Tenma, from the Japanese side, has posted a whole article in English on the best ways to use this card, which I will link in the description. It's a very worthwhile read. It is quite long though, and it has some very specific combos that you can do, so in a more casual setting it'll definitely go off, but it's still worth a read. As for our very own Solemn Vanguard, he did say that Valios can enable a ridiculous amount of tiny pokes, and if you have all the pieces for it and still live at GB3, you probably annihilate your opponent. Those are 2 pretty big ifs though. And he also mentions that Tenma has a huge post going over a massive chain of attacks that's extremely unlikely to actually go off. But the thing is that limits this card very much is that the power fix is behind GB3, which means you gotta either live through your opponent's first stride or give up your own first stride, just a G-Guard in order to go into him. So the fact that he needs 2 or more face-up G units is a bit of a problem, and so that's why it's not as easy to get that skill off. And so really great card, and there's a lot of cool combos, but does require Aquaforce to be a little bit better in terms of the main deck to actually take advantage of it. Next up, we have everyone's favorite Spider Queen, Guilty Empress Darkface Gredora. First skill is an act. Once per turn, Vanguard Circle. You may counterblast 1 and flip a unit face up. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, your opponent's units cannot stand in the stand phase, and your opponent cannot call units other than from hand. So this basically means that nothing can stand. This is units. That includes your Vanguards. Your Vanguard is stunned, but obviously you can still ride over it. But if you do just stride over it, keep in mind the stride ruling. If you stride over a rested unit, it'll stay in rest. So make sure to ride over it first to cancel out that resting state and then stride. So That's an important thing. So against some decks, this will completely shut them down. So Gredora Grade 3 already shuts down columns, but this will make sure that Luar doesn't call anymore. And then Gold Paladin doesn't call from deck anymore. You know, they can still call stuff from hand if they use like the regular Azel or something, but things like the new Spearcross, nah, nothing. A lot of decks will lose their ability to call from anywhere else apart from the hand. This also includes, interestingly, plant tokens too, because they don't come from the hand. But the thing is, there are some decks that don't care about this. Novograpper, Victor, doesn't matter because they call from hand anyway. So they can supply their whole field just like that and not have to worry about it. That being said, if you do stun their column early with the Gredora by riding up, then they won't be able to fulfill that column and then won't be able to combo off as well, and usually won't be able to reach enough drive checks for the Bustard, for example, to actually have an impactful first stride. So that's already a very important skill in my opinion. Second skill is, when she attacks on Vanguard Circle, you may Soul Blast 1, search your deck for up to 1 Grade 3 call to Rearguard Circle, and it gets plus 10k power until end of turn. Shuffle your deck. Doesn't look that amazing, but this has actually three really nice targets. First one, most obvious one, is the Antlion. So you get a really good guard restriction on top of that that's searchable, which is very nice and, you know, sought after. There's a really funny video that I'm going to link to that actually shows exactly that. So definitely, you know, a good spider. On top of that, you still have other cards like the Darkphase Alicides that, I mean, he only just blocks off your intercepts. He has a really nice on-call skill as well that you can use if you need to, but he gets an extra 10k power, and he's actually your biggest beater in the deck, and gaining the extra 10k from her skill as well will actually push him over even more and make it quite hard for your opponent to put up with. The other card I want to mention actually that has a really nice interaction with her is the Hell Demise. Hell Demise says that when you place it on Rearguard Circle, you choose one opponent's rearguards and rest it, and then stand one of your own. Meaning you can attack with something like a Darkphase Alicides, then attack with the Gredora, search out the Hell Demise, and then stand your Alicides to attack one more time. A really cool skill, honestly. It's just super cool. You can do that with the Antlion as well, but obviously it does require a certain setup. So Gredora overall, really good card, another one of the cards that I'm going to be featuring in a separate video. And I should have mentioned, I need to check what other cards I'll be featuring because I've kind of lost track. So I did say Marfesa, Bustard I already did. I guess there hasn't actually been that many. It's been mostly, Avalios not Valios, Gastila I did say. Okay, so the Gredora is one of the other separate ones, so let's just have that in mind. This video is getting insanely long, but I mean it has to be because all these cards are super, super good. The next one is Apex Science Dragon Managarmr Aurum, Great Nature's New Stride. First skill is an act once per turn. You may counterblast 1 and flip a unit face up and perform mill the top card of your deck. If it's a normal unit, until end of turn he gets plus 10k, and if it's trigger unit, he gets drive plus 1 4 times. So you get triggers, you get extra drive checks. You get normal units, he gets extra power and swings for a huge number, which is super nice. On top of that, he has a second skill in the G zone. Once per turn, if he's face up, when your Vanguard attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 to call a card from your hand to Rearguard Circle. That's pretty cool, because you can call stuff to the Axle Circle and then still restand them with something like a Crayon Tiger, and that's definitely quite relevant. So, because that can definitely push out extra attacks. I did ask the Great Nature Specialist, Solemn Vanguard, once again here for some advice, and he said, people sleep on this card. Great Nature's big issue was always that Balorul isn't very impactful when you swing for 4k plus, which is very guardable, and then lets your opponent control your draws while you lose your field. Mana straight up doesn't care. If you mill normal units, you're making a very thick boy who will get restands off Crayon Tiger. So that's referring to the fact that the extra 10k when you mill a normal unit goes to one particular unit, so you can really just stack it on any one of your units. Then he says if you mill trigger units, you're getting free pluses. None of these skills require a retire, but therein lies its weakness. You can't retire stuff from Ikesaburo, so if you need a retire, it has to come from a rearguard. So that's the one weakness of this card, but apart from that, he says it is very good just because there are no real downsides to it, because triggers lead to pluses, and normal units lead to beefy units that can be restood with Crayon Tiger. So good stride that Great Nature did get. And the final stride, and honestly one of my personal favorites, and the one that I'm going to be covering in a separate video, not just this stride, but the whole deck I'm going to be talking about because I am building it myself, Untainted Holy Damsel Green Katrina. First skill, when you stride it, you can flip a unit face up, call up to the same number of plant tokens as the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone to Rearguard Circle, and this unit gets continuous, all your plant tokens get plus 10k until end of turn. This is huge! Maiden of Trailing Rose. Ride, make 2 tokens. Stride this girl, make another plant token. There you go, 3 tokens with an extra 10k. You called a Sylvia, there's another token. You called, I don't know, a Mirka, here's another token. So your token, if you rode Mirka in the early game, you have a token behind your Vanguard, so you have 4 tokens. That's a lot of combos. Gladiolus, Kaivant, Irminsul, so many cards that can do insane things with plant tokens. This is the cheapest meta premium deck you can get, and I'm going to have a whole video dedicated to it. CanYouSayG has an article talking about combos. He has videos posted of the combos that you can do with this girl. She's so good. It's a helmet deck. It is like pretty, like, it's basically Sanctuary Guard 2.0 in a sense, because it's very easy to play and does really sick things that just bashes face, but it is very Sanctuary Guard-esque, so keep that in mind. Her second skill, which is what makes her so Sanctuary Guard-esque, I guess, is when she attacks, search your deck for up to the same number of cards as the number of your plant tokens, call them to rearguard circles, and shuffle your deck. So that's what I was referring to. When you have 4 plant tokens, you can do like Kaivant, Gladiolus, and then like double Sylvia to make extra plant tokens, and then, you know, swing with the Kaivant unboosted, swing with the Gladiolus boosted, search another Kaivant, swing with a boost, huge numbers, end the game early, easy clap. So super good card, but I am going to be featuring this extensively in a separate video, so do look forward to that. This is one of my favorite strides from the whole set, and I think it should be yours too. That is all the strides. Before we finally finish up, I'm going to quickly show the critical triggers. They all have the same skill, Rearguard Circle GB1. When your Vanguard attacks, put them into the soul to draw 1, and your Vanguard gets plus 10 cancel out of that battle. So, same as the old like name-based crit triggers, but they have GB1, and they give plus 10k power instead to kind of deal with the additional power from the new triggers. They also have 15k shield, just like the new crits, and they give you plus 10k power, just like the new crits, so you want to be playing these in premium. These are beautiful, they are great, you definitely need to pick them up, they're very cheap, so get them while they're there. So honestly, this set is amazing. I'm not even surprised how long this set breakdown is. It's well over an hour, but no regrets, it's worth it. This set is just that good. So thank you for watching. This has been a very extensive set breakdown, talking about every single clan, all of the interactions. Thank you so much to the community members that helped me out in making this video and gave me extra advice on some of these cards that I didn't know many things about. So thank you so much. Look forward to the in-depth analysis of the few strides that I mentioned over the coming weeks, because we have a lot to break down from this set. So Premium's looking great. I don't know what you're waiting for, but you might want to pick up your first Premium deck if you haven't already. If you've been with us this whole time, then thank you so much for watching. And as always, check out everything in the description. There's more stuff in there than usual. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.